Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. Want to improve your organization's customer service? Looking for insider tips to knock your customer socks off? Then you're in the right place. Here's your host, Yannick Grant.
Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. On today's episode, our guest is Darby Vannier. With over 20 years of experience, Darby is a seasoned leader adept at building and growing organizations. As president and CEO of Indispensable Leadership Group, he excels as an executive coach, consultant, speaker, and fractional COO, focusing on strategic and leadership development. He has led effective teams of more than 100 employees, coached others into their own leadership positions, and created stability during challenging organizational transitions. Darby built his career on the philosophy that developing the right people is the key to success. So without further delay, sit back, plug your earphones in, and let's jump right into this conversation with Darby. Welcome, Darby.
Thanks, Yannick. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Now, Darby, even though we read a very short snippet of your journey, your little bio, we always like to give our guests an opportunity to share in their own words a little bit about how you got from where you were to where you are today.
Yeah, so I've had kind of a diverse career, actually. So I started off in retail, actually kind of in the entertainment industry, working as a manager at a 22-screen movie theater, which is an interesting industry, especially back at that time when it was before digital movies and everything came in on actual celluloid film and everything. So, but yeah, 22-screen movie theater, we would serve, thousands of people a day. And that was an interesting experience getting started because it definitely was jumping right into that retail type environment, bringing in, at that point, you're talking about most of our employees were high school or college age students. And so that's just a different level of team member that you're managing. From there, I kind of jumped even further into retail. I actually became a store manager for Kinko's at the time. So the print shop Kinko's, which is now FedEx Office, but at the time it was still Kinko's. And at that time, all the Kinko's were 24-hour stores. Like they never closed. No, didn't close on any holidays, didn't close any hours, nothing. So that was definitely a learning experience, I will say, managing a 24-hour-a-day business from that standpoint. And I did that about 6 years and then moved into the nonprofit world where I took over as CEO of an international livestock association, actually for alpacas of all things. And it's always an interesting story because I tell people when I got the interview for the job, I had to look up what an alpaca was because I had a general idea that it was like a llama, but I didn't exactly know what it was. So kind of entered into a whole new realm there. And I did that for about 11 years where I reported directly to a board, grew that organization, fixed a lot of things in that organization, and then grew that organization. And then we actually went through a merger process and merged with another national organization. And I took over as CEO of the newly created merged organization for that industry. And then from there, I decided, I'm kind of ready to be done with this nonprofit thing. And I exited nonprofit, went back into the for-profit world, joined a company that does leadership development, strategic planning, executive coaching, that sort of thing, because I've always been passionate about leadership and did that for about 7 years. And then last year decided, what, I think I'm going to break off and do my own things. And I had a company established previously for some consulting and stuff that I had done, and I just expanded that and started offering fractional leadership services and executive coaching on my own and have built that up from there. So still working on that, and that's kind of gets us up to date.
All right, quite a journey. Thank you so much for sharing, Darby. Now, as part of this journey, you are also an author, and your book is titled The Indispensable Leader. So could you share with our listeners a little bit about that book? I do have some questions I want to ask specifically, but I kind of just want to hear in your own words, like, what was your intention when you wrote the book? What is the book about? Who is the book geared towards? And kind of, what was your sentiment when you were putting it all together?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is really geared towards anybody who I won't even say young leaders. I would say anybody who's really either starting out in leadership, leading other people, or even if they have been leading people and they just want to have some experience and some knowledge to refine maybe their leadership style. And it's kind of one of those things I've kind of kept stories over the years throughout my career because I'm sure you have experienced throughout your career, you encounter interesting things. I'll just put it that way. Some challenging things and some difficult things, and then some really exciting things. So I had lots of things that I have accumulated throughout my career that I felt like these were good learning experiences for me at the time. And had I had this information when I was starting out being a leader, it would have been highly beneficial. So, in the midst of COVID back in 2020, when everything kind of shut down and we all had more time because we were staying home and everything, I decided, seems like a good time to start writing a book. So that's when I started on the book. And the book really kind of goes down the path of taking this idea of, I start off the book by basically saying, you hear people say this question, are you a manager or are you a leader? And I
Mm-hmm.
really attack that and I say, we're really looking at that wrong because I think that's the wrong question. It assumes that people who would probably consider themselves managers of things cannot be good leaders. And that's not the case. I know a fair number of people who definitely consider themselves managers who are really spectacular leaders as well. So I kind of ask people to look at it a little bit differently. And what I think people mean is actually more of, are you more manager oriented or are you more visionary and entrepreneurial oriented? And if you think about that as a spectrum, everybody exists somewhere on that spectrum. And you don't want to be at the far end of either end of that because you don't want to be too high visionary that you just come up with a lot of ideas and nothing gets done. But you don't want to be too far managerial where you only care about checking off your list and you don't really care why you're doing it. So what I basically ask people to do is think about this more like a Venn diagram where you have two intersecting circles, and let's take the best traits of both manager and visionary um, archetypes and create the best possible leader that you can be. Because there's only a certain amount of things that you have access to yourself. There's only a certain amount of things that you can gain yourself. So let's find those best things, and then let's try to release the bad things so that the bad traits of those archetypes so that we don't fall into those ruts as well. And I kind of go down that journey and I use a lot of stories from my career to illustrate various points and on leadership and talking about mentorship and some of those things as well so that people can gain that knowledge that I didn't necessarily have at the time as I was going through it.
All right. So I like the fact that you spoke about are you a leader or a manager? But even outside of that, you talk about in the book just visionary leaders. And I'm not sure what was the other term that you had outside of visionary?
Managers.
Managers. So can you differentiate? I know you said we look on it from a different perspective, but if we were to put it in terms of hierarchy, or better yet, in terms of in an organization, if you really want to motivate people, get them to do what you want them to do without, having to literally stand up over them with a stick over their head saying, if you don't do this, this is the sanction that's going to be enforced. Which role do you think is more effective, the manager's role or the leader's role?
So I would actually say both are important, and it's good to have a mix of both types of individuals within an organization. Here's the reason why. So people with manager characteristics who fall more on that side of the spectrum are people who are very process oriented. They're usually very organized. They're the ones who are able to like look at something and say, here's how it's going to get done. Like they can outline the 50 steps it's going to take to get there. They're about creating a list and checking off the things and getting stuff done. They're the ones that are talking about what are we going to do and how are we going to do it. And sometimes they don't always care about the why. They should, and that's what I mean by making sure that we try to pull in the best traits of both worlds. But those are the folks who are going to get stuff done for you, and they are the folks who can execute on a vision. So basically, they can take a vision of a founder or a visionary, and they can translate that vision into the action steps that it's going to take to accomplish it. So on the visionary side, you have to have visionaries as well, because the high visionary people, those are the folks who are generating lots of ideas. They're coming up with 5 or 10 new ideas every day. They're usually very passionate about their ideas. Oftentimes, entrepreneurs are visionaries because that is the type of individuals who are drawn to starting a business and taking that risk and everything. Because in their minds, when they think of an idea, when they envision something, it's done. Like we're there, and it is done. They're the ones that are more going to be talking about why are we doing something. Like they want to be able to explain and show their passion for why is it that we want to accomplish whatever it is that they've come up with. The difficulty you can run into with a visionary, though, is that they tend to move on very quickly because they only love, if you get a very high visionary person, they only love generating new ideas. They don't want to talk about how to get there. They just want it done. So that visionary needs to have people who are more managerial in nature so that they can actually get stuff done. So they need to have and in most companies, you almost have to have two top individuals who are one is one and one is the other. That's why you often see a CEO who's high visionary and you see a COO who is the person who executes. And those two individuals have to have a high amount of trust because they will piss each other off. I mean, that's the bottom line. Because what will happen is that COO, who's more process oriented, who's the one going, okay, there's these 50 problems we have to solve before we can get there. They are going to be like saying, slow down, pump the brakes. We gotta back up here. And the high visionary CEO is the one saying, no, we got to move forward. And I want to do all these things and everything. So in order for a company to be highly successful, you almost have to have that mix. You see this with celebrity leaders, I guess I'll call them. So people like Steve Jobs, for example. It's well known that he was very high visionary, brilliant guy, came up with amazing things, had very high expectations, very passionate about his industry, but he learned very early on. I mean, he basically lost his company initially before he came back many years later. He learned very early on that he needed to have people that could execute those ideas because he just wanted to spend time on generating ideas. He needed an execution team as well. So eventually he figured out he had to have individuals who worked with him that he trusted that could execute those ideas that could challenge him and slow him down. He would, on the opposite side of that, push them forward. So it's this weird balancing act. So every company needs to have a good mix of both in order to be successful.
All right. Now, in the book, you also talk about, which I found this part really fascinating, that you should be curious and you should engage curiosity. And curiosity sometimes I think can be misinterpreted. Sometimes, for example, people will think that curiosity, I find, is being inquisitive. You know, it's a similar adjective, but inquisitive for some reason connotates almost you being concerned or asking questions about things that should not concern you. But I do believe that that's how we learn, right? About asking questions, exploring, experiencing. Explain to us a little bit about what you meant when you said engage or encourage curiosity and being curious as a leader.
Yeah, it certainly can mean inquisitive, and that is something that it can mean. But when I talk about being curious and when I coach leaders and encourage them to be curious, what I'm really trying to do is encourage folks to be lifelong learners. Like I want you to be curious about new things. Go read books, go meet new people, go join a group that you wouldn't necessarily join because by gaining those additional experiences and that additional knowledge, you're only going to grow as a leader. So I'm very big on making sure that folks that I coach and myself do not get stagnant. And what that means is you have to be engaged. You have to be engaged in what you do. You have to be engaged in your industry. You have to be engaged in life. So sometimes it's professional development and you're joining an association or you're reading a book or whatever. Sometimes it might be personal development where you're learning a new language or traveling to a country that you've never been to so that you can gain that experience because all of those things are important. They're going to make you a much, much better, well-rounded leader. Especially as I I speak to college students every now and then. And as I speak to college students, that's one thing that I talk to them about is gain a broad set of experiences because a lot of us um, really end up, I mean, in the United States, a lot of folks who go to college end up going to college nearby home. So they're exposed to, yes, a new set of people, but it may be very similar to what they're used to. So I encourage people to get out of your comfort zone and go do some other things because the more experiences you have, the better leader you're going to be. I mean, certainly looking back at my career, I'm sure as you look at your career, every single thing that I dealt with and went through, all of that past history really made me into the leader that I am today. And everything that I'm doing today will make me into the leader that I am in 5 years. I mean, that's the bottom line. So you got to have that curiosity. If you don't, you're going to end up stagnant. You're not going to really grow as a leader. You're probably not going to promote up very much. In most industries, you really do need to be curious so that you can continue to expand as well.
Yes, I totally agree that you should definitely be open to learning, and from everything that you do, it definitely adds to who you are today. As you said, what you're doing now is building for where you're going to be 5 years from now. In the book, you also mentioned Darby, and I was exposed to this many years ago when I had done a leadership course myself, the whole conscious competence model. And I like the example that you gave with the baby. So I'd love for you to kind of just explain that to the audience as well, the 4 phases, and then the example that you gave to reinforce the concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that really helps in coaching as well because it's something that everybody goes through, but they don't really pinpoint that they're actually going through it. So the idea here is there's 4 phases of competence, and you really start off, no matter what it is, in some new experience, in some new activity. You start a new job, you learn how to drive, whatever it is. You start off this idea as being unconsciously incompetent, which means you're incompetent at whatever you're doing and you don't even know you're incompetent at it. And that's a big problem um, because then you're doing things and you don't even know you're doing them wrong. So the idea is hopefully somebody will point out to you, or you'll eventually move into the idea of conscious incompetence. And that's really where you're still incompetent at it, but you recognize that you're incompetent at it. So you're doing it wrong. It's kind of a situation, that you don't know something. And then after that, the idea is that you move into um, conscious competence, which means that you're competent at it, but you have to think about it all the time. It's not become a habit. Like you have to actually think about whatever the activity is. So, I mean, if you think about when you're learning to drive, this is a good thing, or this is the thing we encounter. You have to constantly think about turning your turn signal on, or stopping at the stop sign, or stopping at the light, or seeing the light turn yellow, or whatever that is. You are at that point consciously competent. So you can do it, but you got to think about it all the time. The last phase is really where you want to get to, especially with regard to leading people. You want to get to unconscious competence, where it is that you are competent at something and you don't have to constantly think about it. It just happens. So this basically is the idea of it becomes habit. Um, there's actually an author named Charles Duhigg. He wrote a book called The Power of Habit. It's a spectacular book, but he talks about habit loops where your brain is set up so that it creates these habit loops out of things that you do regularly. And that's how you end up. I don't know, if you've ever driven a car and then you're driving along and sometimes you're like, I don't remember the last 5 minutes. And it kind of freaks you out.
Mm-hmm.
That happens because of that, because your brain can handle that sort of thing and basically has created a habit loop. It's the same reason, like when I left my position last year and I was no longer going to the office on a regular basis. Your habit loop changes. So normally my habit loop for driving to the office was the same every day. I would do the exact same thing, the exact same route, whatever it was. Well, on 2 different occasions at the end of the year last year, I was driving in the direction of where my old office was, and I looked up, and pretty soon, like I'm driving towards the office, I'm going the whole wrong direction for where I was headed. But my brain engaged this habit loop my brain thought, oh, you're doing the habit loop that we haven't done in a while to go to the office.
Let's
So
go
go to
there.
the office. And then I end up on the entirely wrong road and everything because I was going to the office. But that's the idea of unconscious competence that you want to get to is be able to create those habits so that things just happen for you on a regular basis.
All right, brilliant, brilliant. So, just want to remind our listeners, Darby's book is out. It's out, right, Darby?
It is absolutely.
So Darby's book is out, available on all platforms that you would want to purchase a book from. Would definitely recommend that you go and consume some of the great content he has in it. I haven't fully finished reading it, but the parts that I have been able to garner were really, really insightful. And he was able to share a bit of it with our listeners in the conversation today. So definitely a must have read for 2024. Thank you so much for sharing, Darby.
Absolutely.
All right, Darby, could you also share with our listeners what is the one online resource, tool, website, or app that you absolutely can't live without in your business?
So from my perspective, it's LinkedIn just because of the industry that I'm in. You know, it is definitely the one online resource I could not live without. I mean, there's lots of things out there, of course, especially with social media and everything nowadays. It really depends on the industry individuals are in. But for me, LinkedIn is it. And definitely, those who are listening, you can find me on LinkedIn. I will connect with you. Just search for Darby Vannier, and I'm happy to connect with you on LinkedIn as well.
All right. Can you also share with our listeners maybe one or two books that you've read? It could be a book that you read recently, or even one that you read a very long time ago, but it had a great impact on you.
Yeah, so there is lots of books that certainly I have utilized over the years, but there is one book that I have bought and given away more copies of this book than any other book. And it's a book called Quiet. It's by a woman. Her name is Susan Cain. And it's about kind of leading as an introvert. And the reason that I liked it is that I know it doesn't always seem like it to individuals when I do these podcasts, and I love to speak to people and stuff like that, but I'm a pretty big introvert. And it was the first book that I read that I was like, somebody actually gets me. So she kind of talks about what it's like to be an introvert and how it's kind of a spectrum. And there are certainly individuals who are introverts who have no desire to speak to people, for example. Whereas I love if I get a group of 1,500 people to speak in front of, great, I am happy. Now, I don't want to step down off the stage and talk to you one on one, really, afterwards, but I'll do it. And you won't necessarily know that I'm uncomfortable, but that's not my comfort zone. So every introvert's a little bit different, and it's more about how your energy is recharged. So my energy is recharged by quiet time and being alone. I have no problem going on a vacation for a few days and being by myself the entire time and not talking to anybody. That would freak out an extrovert. But the reason that I love the book is that I've given it to both introverts and extroverts. And the reason it's important for extroverts to read as well is you work with a lot of introverted individuals, and this world we live in is catered to extroverts, and it can be incredibly difficult for those of us who are introverts to live in, and we are forced to adjust to you all. So I encourage extroverts to read this book as well because you'll really learn a lot, especially as you lead and manage people. It will help you better manage individuals. It will also help you understand how to take advantage of utilizing the skills and the experience of introverts that maybe an extrovert doesn't necessarily have. So, from a professional standpoint, I always recommend it. I also recommend it for individuals who are married, who have spouses who maybe are the opposite of them, because it'll help you totally understand your spouse a lot more as well.
That's true. All right. So we'll have the link to Suzanne's book in the show notes of this episode. Darby, can you also share with us what's the one thing in your life right now that you're really excited about? Either something you're working on to develop yourself or your people.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm still under a year on totally breaking out on my own and building my own company. So building my business is what I'm really passionate about right now. I'm working on a new speaking topic regarding the impact that leaders make in the world,
Mm-hmm.
even over interactions that they might have considered insignificant. So it's kind of like the ripple effect. So I'm working on this talk. I'm excited about that as well to be able to talk to folks about that. And then just really working to help each one of my fractional leadership clients be as successful as possible. It is so amazing to be able to work with multiple clients and see individual companies continue to grow and scale and to have a part in that as well.
All right, awesome. Now, before we wrap our episodes up, we always like to ask our guests, do you have a quote or a saying that during times of adversity or challenge, you'll tend to revert to this quote? If for any reason you get derailed or you get off track, and the quote kind of helps to get you back on track.
I don't really have a quote, but I kind of have more of a philosophy. And my philosophy with this, and I use this again when I coach other leaders too, is everything is temporary. And the one thing you have to remember is that everybody around you is going through their own stuff. So I always encourage people to be kind when you're dealing with other individuals because you don't know what's going on in their lives. No matter how well you think you know them, you don't know everything that's going on. So as I encounter adversity, I tend to kind of revert back to, okay, let's control what I can control, and then I need to let the other stuff go. I certainly have had multiple times in my career where I've had some very difficult situations that I've dealt with professionally. And that's what I've come back to is okay, can you control this particular thing that's happening? No, but you can control these other two aspects of it, and you can make sure that you do those things really well. And what I have found is if I do that and I just remember that this is just one more piece of experience in my life and in my career, part of that past history that I said that makes us all who we are. If I can remember that, then it's usually easy to get through those things. Not that it's not a challenge, still can be a challenge, still can be stressful, but it does definitely help you as you move through those challenging times.
All right. So we'll definitely have that summary of what you shared with us in terms of that quote or that thought that helps to get you from one stage to the next if for any reason you feel derailed. Now, Darby, our listeners would have tapped into this episode and they're quite intrigued with your journey. They're quite intrigued with what you're doing, your book. They would like to connect with you online. Where can they find you online?
Yeah, well, the first place is go to my website. It is beindispensable.com. And that will have all the links to everything. You can find my book and about information about my company and how to hire me as a speaker or anything like that. It has all the links to social media as well. You can connect with me on Facebook through Indispensable Leadership Group is my Facebook business. But I am most active on LinkedIn, and you can connect to me through Indispensable Leadership Group as a business on LinkedIn, but you can also just search for me, Darby Vannier, and that's where I am most active. And I encourage folks to connect with me there as well. But again, my website is beindispensable.com.
Okay, and the beindispensable.com is just as you said it, right? BEINDISPENSABLE.com, correct?
Correct. Thank you.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure because, sometimes people have websites and the B is like a different
Right.
version of B. So just want to make sure it's the correct B. All right, perfect. Now, Darby, thank you so much for hopping on our podcast today and sharing all these great insights from your book, as well as all of the experience and exposures that you've had over the years that have crafted, the person that you are today and the invaluable knowledge and experience and coaching that you've been able to offer to your clients. And so the information that you shared with us was extremely valuable. The examples that you gave, the characteristics and the comparison as it relates to, having a bit of both is critical to the organization's success as a manager and a leader was really, really, really insightful. And I just want to extend a great amount of gratitude to you for taking time to share with us today.
Absolutely. I appreciate being on.
All right, just want to remind our listeners that you can follow us on X at NavigatingCX and feel free to join our private Facebook group, Navigating the Customer Experience Community. Until next time, I'm your host, Yannick Grant. We also have a new book available on Amazon, The ABCs of a Fantastic Customer Experience. It's available in ebook and paperback. So if you want to increase revenue in your organization, build a stronger service culture, and create employees or develop employees who are really mastering service delivery in your business, you need to grab a copy of this book. Until next time, I'm your host, Yannick Grant.
Thanks for listening. For more awesome resources to take your customer service game to another level, head over to navigatingthecustomerexperience.com. See you next time.